Hello and welcome to We Are the Deluge. We are your co-hosts, Emily Crandall and John McMahon, loudly and tearily protesting this road trip that's a quagmire in the same frustrating circular murk, and we do not have a fiddle.
Sadly fiddleless.
Sadly fiddleless. This is a spoiler-free chapter-by-chapter podcast about the climate change novel The Deluge by Stephen Markley. Today we're discussing The Weatherman. Yes, this Weatherman. Set in 2030, the third chapter from Shane's point of view, which we are presenting in the form of a political manifesto.
Beautiful. Time to start with our declaration. Let's be clear and direct up front.
You want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. The 6 degrees principles meet, suspended briefly outside of technological time, contemplating escalation at a crossroads. There is no more time.
That's really good. I went with time to escalate everything, escalate the violence, the tension, the writing style, the text boxes, and questions about what Markley is up to in this novel.
So good.
Yeah, it'll connect at the end of the episode, I'm sure.
Escalate. This chapter was really stressful for me. I read on the first read, I was like, oh my God, I just felt tense. And then I was like, what am I going to talk about? And then when I went back through, I was like, oh my God, there's so much here.
There is. You had a useful framing, I think, for us to begin the diagnosis of the current problem with.
Well, do we want to lay down any plot points first, or?
This is the first time we've seen all 5 of them together.
Yes, that's true.
Right. We've seen Shane with Kai. We've seen Shane with Murdock twice. Right. But this is the first time we get time with Alan and time with Quinn.
Yeah. It's a little bit of like what's that called? A bottle episode.
It is. Of course it is.
Yeah.
Markley loves his little formal, not frivolities, flourishes. There we go.
Yes. Okay. And then just one plot note that is a reveal that I have a question for you about.
Okay.
We learn about the people who've been busted in association with these bombing operations.
Yes.
One of whom is a John Gerald in Ohio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we learn about Keeper with his given name.
We do.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you catch how he gets caught?
It was the bag of chips.
The bag of Fritos.
Fritos, right, which we talked about on the Fritos.
So I was going to ask you, did you know when we were talking about the Fritos last time that that's how he got caught?
I was not consciously thinking about that, but I'm going to go on the theory that it was submerged in my unconscious.
Yes, yeah. I was like Fritos. We were just talking about that.
And there are several ways in which this podcast is just so infecting my brain, is that I unthinkingly, without like planning to do so, a couple of weeks ago, like got some Fritos and only in retrospect realized that we had just talked about them.
Yeah.
And then I texted you a week or two ago that I had a dream that was Deluge Core I am a member of 6 degrees.
Amazing. Oh yeah. I mean, it's the time thing. We'll get into it.
Sure, we sure will. The text boxes have a lot to say about time.
All right.
This time.
Let's dig into our diagnosis, shall we?
Please.
Okay, so as you mentioned in your summary, the escalation is really huge, but also just generally discussion of violence in this chapter really struck me that like there's the sort of question of, do we escalate up our tactics, and where is the permissible line for like to what degree we can engage in violence? And then I think there's a discussion too of like different shapes of violence, right? Like who is violent good or violent bad, right? If we can borrow from the sort of like
alignment
chaotic
charts,
good neutral. Yeah. And then there's also, I think, the background question around the pace of violence, which becomes a foreground question when they're actually having the conversation about escalation. So like, is it more violent to just sort of, and I'm thinking with like Nixon here on slow violence, is it more violent to just let everyone die than it is to kill someone to save everyone else? And like which speed is sort of permissible or not permissible, and like by what metric? And I just like struck me as really clever how all those like layers get kind of woven together and distilled almost into like a single ethical question. Like, should we do this or should we not do this?
Yes, a single ethical question, but as you frame the problematic of this chapter that way, it strikes me that there's also a formal way into this very question, because in the way that Markley has chosen to give the biographies of these characters, we actually get like, I mean, talking about like ideal type,
Mhm.
alignment charts, we get like kind of ideal type characters, right?
Mhm.
In the five principles, right? So we have Alan, who is a professor of history, was a professor of history.
Yeah.
Lots of humor in mind for that purpose. Dark, 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 dark humor.
So many
And was
marginal
a
LOLs.
student of social movements and like wrote about the School of the Americas, right? So like he has an extremely deep academic knowledge of violence. We have Murdock, right, who gives disquisitions through the text boxes and sometimes in dialogue about the way that like Aimé Césaire boomerang like the violence of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have come back to roost in the US. We have Quinn, Quinn is such a fascinating character. I can't wait to talk about her with you later
Yeah.
on, because she comes to stand in for like the hacktivist that others think is not committed or serious to the cause because she grew up rich and went to an Ivy League school and all of that. And thus she gets to have some of the most like fervent revolutionary dreams
Mm.
and violent dreams. And Shane are then like the most committed like activists, I think, in a kind of classic sense. Like they're the two that most stand in for other activists I have met in real life or in
Mhm.
fiction. But what Markley does is put them on opposite sides
Yeah.
of the violence, what it means, what is appropriate or legitimate violence or illegitimate violence, and all of that. So like the way that he puts these five people with these five backgrounds together, like really amplifies the tension of precisely what you're identifying.
And I think what's also amazing is that, right, so Shane says, "We gotta take someone out," right?
Yeah.
And then we get
Lots of people out.
yeah, and then Quinn says in a box, "I've been" finally someone said what I've been thinking since 2016.
Uh-huh.
Murdock says in a box, "I didn't think she had it in her."
Yep.
And I don't think we get a box from Kai. Oh, we do. The one we get from Kai is like
Oh
a
my God.
flashback to a near death experience in a car.
Mm-hmm.
And then the box we get from Alan is him, like,
It's an
reflecting on
academic
how
disquisition.
yeah, like, how his knowledge is basically, like, for naught, right? Like, he has all
Mm-hmm.
this wisdom that no one's heeding, essentially. And then we learn in the end, they take a vote, and we're not privy to the vote itself, right? That's kind of where the scene ends, and then it cuts to later, Shane's having an emotional breakdown, and Alan says, "You lost. Are you upset because 'cause we're not killing people?" And know we don't get to know the final tally, like, who votes what.
I was definitely 3-2, right? Like
It's gotta be.
it was Quinn and Shane saying, yes, we should start killing like CEOs and members of their family.
Yeah,
Kai and Alan, who were like clearly fuck no from the start, and
yeah.
Murdoch was the swing vote.
But that's shocking to me because I feel like we also get in this chapter him sort of expressly confirming the suspicion that he's, like, in love with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he seems to be kind of in awe of the fact that she suggests it. And
Yes.
one of his one of the kind of rhetorical moves he makes in the conversation about whether this is a legitimate use of violence or not is like Kai says, "We're not murderers." And Murdoch is like, "I am. I'm
Yeah.
a murderer." And like I've had to come to terms with that. And so like I could see him going either way actually. And
Mm-hmm.
I found myself, even though I think I remembered this, like surprised that
Yep.
she loses. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because it's a little bit of like a pulling out the rug from the reader, because we do expect her. And in some ways, maybe we expect, we're still what, page 314 out of almost 800. So we're still in like rising action in a kind of
Yeah.
classical definition or tropey definition. So we expect the full escalation as opposed to the multiple mini escalations that are noted, discussed, voted on, approved in the rest of the chapter.
Yeah. I don't know if we learn more about the vote itself later. I
No,
assume we won't, but
no, I don't
the
think so.
only thing I could think of for not in terms of Markley's strategy, but like in terms of putting on Murdoch as a character and like trying to think from his perspective, the only thing I could think of that has to do with the question of the scope of violence vis-a-vis the time horizon kind
Yeah.
of question that we've been talking about is like in one of his last text boxes, he like loses time a little bit, or
Yes.
like loses the thread of time. So in my mind, I was like, "Ooh, what if like in the vote, he's like sort of out of sync or out of time, kind of literally with everyone else?" And like
Oh,
to him,
wow.
it's not a vote on carrying out an assassination plot as a political statement about climate change, like an urgent, right, political statement, but it's actually about like the continuation of the war on terror and like the deaths that he has c- characterized in a political and moral sense as needless.
Hmm. That's an incredible read. I hadn't thought about that.
I
I'll
don't know
give
if
you.
that's
I'll
true.
well. I'll give you my much more pedestrian reading, but then, but I want to pursue yours first. And so you're right. He is the last text box
Yeah.
in the chapter, and this comes just like a page before Shane says, "Shall we vote?" And the way that it ends is page 316. His brain fireworked the way it sometimes did, and he wondered if he was back in Iraq or in this cabin or off in some restaurant in the future discussing their end game and watching darkening clouds roll in across stewing white-capped water.
Yeah. Which like they in the first chapter, same chapter, there are in a restaurant, right?
Yep, exactly.
And also it's giving day after tomorrow.
Ooh, it absolutely is. I hadn't thought about that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
That was the only thing I could think of.
That there's a sentimental reading and there's tinges of sentimentality that Mark Lee lets into this book, which I think
Mhm.
maybe make this reading viable. That because Murdock so intimately understands what it means to be a killer, like, and we know what his feelings are towards Shane even more in this chapter than in preceding chapters. And we get the specter raised by Alan of like wanting to be fatherly. Like, I
Yeah.
wonder if there's some like
Protective.
yeah, protective, like, I don't want Shane to become the killer that I know what it's like to be.
Right. Right. And if they go ahead with the plot, they're all killers, but it was her idea, right? So
Mhm.
she's sort of like the killer, even if she doesn't
Yeah,
ever press the
pull the
button or
trigger,
pull the
yeah.
trigger or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, well, maybe those are complementary readings
Yeah,
also.
yeah, I think that's true. I mean,
Both end.
both and indeed. And Alan Alan gives the most academic perspective, but he also has this really important line, like, when he and Shane are, like, embraced/fighting at the very end of the chapter. Right, and he says, Shane, you made the argument that had to be made, right?
Yeah.
So it's like like a dialectic materialism that it was inevitable that at some point this conversation would happen.
Yeah.
And Alan even says that earlier, his disappointment is that it was Shane who brought it up,
Right.
which means who did he think was going to be the one that would suggest it? Probably Murdoch.
Maybe. Maybe Quinn?
Maybe Quinn, who we find out is Kai's recruit.
He'd feared this moment for some time now that one of them might suggest such a thing. Never thought it would be. So my marginal note next to that box is Luigi.
I mean, yeah, and also Luigi.
Yeah. Yeah, he's an interesting character.
Alan?
Yeah.
It's just a huge drag of academics, right?
I think so, but like how to
But an
square it
empathetic
with
dragging.
Tony too.
I
Like,
know.
does Stephen Markley have like is his dad a professor? I
Great
need to
question.
know this.
Great
Or like his
question.
uncle or something, like
Yeah, there is a professor in his life, clearly. Right? Because it's like Alan apparently tried to get tenure twice. And I
Mhm.
mean, I took the insinuation to be that he was too radical in his research, like was too critical of the US military industrial complex.
Yeah.
Is I think partially what we're meant to interpret as a possibility.
And they meet in the South, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would make sense, I guess, kind of
Yeah.
politically.
And so he is done with academia, right? And he starts a furniture company. They rely on his wife's money, his family does for a while. And he devotes himself to 6 degrees and using this furniture company as the perfect cover.
Wife has to know. I don't know. Maybe that I've forgotten a lot of the end now that it was funny when we started, I had memories of the end,
Sure.
and since we've been going through the first half, my memories of the end have sort of left my brain, and now I feel like I'm reading it again for the first time, which is kind of funny.
I'm going to cryptically no comment your
Okay.
question/point.
Cryptically, no comment. Perfect.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I was weirdly, and this is probably because of the class I'm teaching on feminist sex wars perspectives on porn, but I was actually thinking about Catherine McKinnon a little bit reading this discussion because I was
Amazing.
trying to convince my students that when she says like we can't separate out sex from violence, she's not saying that like there is no there is no sex that is not violent. What she's saying is that like that one way to think about violence is that when there is a power differential, right? A
Hmm.
power inequality, that relationship in and of itself is violence, like as the
Yeah.
noun, not just
Hmm.
violent, potentially
Hmm.
violent, right? As an
Hmm.
adjective. And like the grammar of violence, I think she's kind of playing with. I don't agree. Like, there's a lot of important critiques, I think, to make of McKinnon, but I think that thinking about violence as not just an act of violence that has a consequence of harm, whether like
Yeah.
psychic or bodily, but
But as
as
like a structural and relational.
like phenomena or like
Yeah.
or a structural or relational like backdrop against which mundane things happen.
That's a very like Amy Allen inspired interpretation
Yeah,
of
I think
McKinnon. Like
so.
something
Yeah.
about like Allen's book on power is like this
Mhm.
kind of background condition,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
maybe she even uses backdrop specifically.
But it strikes me that when they're talking about in that debate, right? So Alan says, I have 3 reasons for Shane's 3 reasons. And he says, we're going to lose support when we start killing people, whatever. But then he says, all we'll be doing is killing cogs in a machine. It's time and work and risk to take out an interchangeable functionary. They mint out thousands of new ones. So, like, we
In
can't,
the Ivy League every year, we
yeah,
should
yeah,
note, as part
in
of
the
his
Ivy
critique.
League.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So we don't want to kill them, but we want to recruit them. And I feel like what he's right. And we differ with Morris and her ilk about what nonviolence means. Yes. But nonviolent movements succeed by flipping those within the power structure. And I'm not like, I don't know what he means by nonviolence. And I'm also not clear, like, does he just mean that Kate Morris and A Fierce Blue Fire have a hard line on nonviolence and that their approach to it is a little murkier and there's a little more room? Or is it actually a definitional question?
I think it's the former rather than the latter.
Mm,
Like, I think Allen has a very clear definition of nonviolence. I think for him, it's as long as you don't target humans, right? As long as no
yeah.
human dies, it's not, it's as long as no human dies, it's nonviolent,
Yeah.
right? So bomb as much infrastructure as you can, blow up whatever pipelines you're going to blow up, so on and so forth. But at the moment at which you start, and I think that the question for him is intentionally killing humans. Like, I wonder if like,
Mm.
okay, someone doesn't evacuate in time, right? And X number of people are killed in one of their actions.
Oh, I
Right?
think
Does
he would
he?
be against that.
Yeah, no, I,
Yeah.
I agree, but like, I wonder, like, does intention figure into his definition of nonviolence? Whereas,
Yeah.
like, the Fierce Blue Fire crew is very, very strident that like bombing is violent, even if it's to property.
Right. But I do think there is some like slipperiness here too in
Yeah,
what counts as infrastructure, right? They're like, well, the economic
precisely.
infrastructure is infrastructure. Does it just have to be physical infrastructure? And
Hmm.
like, is not the Ivy League part of the infrastructure on Alan's own admission, right? And he's saying, like, sure, they'll just keep cranking out people. So the people, I think he's making an argument that the people themselves are not part of the infrastructure, but I think you could make the argument that they are.
Which is the argument that
Yeah.
Shane in particular makes, right?
Yeah.
A little bit
Yeah.
earlier, right? That what makes us think, this is 315, what makes us think these elites are any different from all the other tyrants and kings who've come before because they wear suits? If anything, they're worse. We're talking about people who are happily incinerating the conditions for life on Earth for nothing more than a few quarters of profit. We can hem and haw about violence, but fuck, man, they are the most violent people history's ever seen. And there's just no time left.
There's like some really interesting concept play happening here,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have more to say about violence, but I don't want to give away my theory section.
Okay, that's fine. I think that's okay. Let's talk about time, right? We were just
Yeah.
that's something that Shane is, I think, most preoccupied with is that there's no time left. Although Quinn is as well in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
And it's Lolly, right, who
Mhm.
is the primary driver of Shane's "we're out of time, there is no time." And there's two things happening at once. And there's like something about the personal is political here, obviously, that simultaneously there's no time left, including no time left like for there to be an inhabitable planet for her daughter. But then she also at another point says, I think this is to Alan and Murdock, that she's not worried about what is the climate that her daughter will live in, but she's worrying about the future and whether there's time left to like, is she going to have money for Lolly to go to college?
Mm.
Right. So like there's like the reproductive futurity
Yeah.
and or like kinship or like familial futurity and the climate futurity like are folding back in on one another in this
Yeah.
chapter.
And I think just this isn't ever something she says, but it's something we feel like she's in a daily sense pressed for time, right? So
Barbara Ehrenreich style, yeah.
like, yeah, but
R.I.P.
like twice, right? Lolly pees her pants. And in both cases, well, in the first case at least, it's like partially Shane's fault or
Yes.
fully Shane's fault, right? She's
Yes.
like looking for the key and her daughter is clearly distressed, right? But she's like, we're pressed for time if I don't find this key. And it's not just like I'm busy and a kind of like misplaced priority situation, right? Like it's more important to be busy than it is to spend time with my kid. It's literally like if one thread of this web of lies I've set up, right, crumbles, then like
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to prison and I'm never going to see my daughter again, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the urgency of the time is real, but she gives up on these little moments, right, for the sake of the bigger, more pressing time horizon, and then and then she's like constantly berating herself for all these failures, right?
Yep.
And like that sucks, but also it is her fault that Lolly pees her pants. She didn't listen to her, and she narrates the urgency in her voice, and then is like, "Oh shit!" Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's brutal. Those two scenes were brutal for me.
I mean, as I think it's Shane who says that motherhood is war,
Yeah,
right, in this chapter, which is, that's drawing on a long, rich history.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm also really struck by the time in so it's not just like there's no time left for the planet. There's no time left in this kinship sense, but there's also a like we're already out of time, which I think is a slightly different way of characterizing the problem. So like when we're there's no time left is like we're still in the timeline where right where like what actions we take matter for the outcome. Saying we've
Mm-hmm.
already run out of time puts us actually in a different like time frame, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a overly
No, it does. I mean, I guess we should note that like they're in 2030,
yeah.
right? So presumably they've had several more reports about like, okay, we are locked into at least this much warming, right?
Mhm.
Than we have here in 2025. And the other thing that struck me, and this is a function of the time jump that Markley makes, that like 17 years have elapsed of 6 degrees by the time we get to this moment in 2030, right? I think it's Quinn, right, who says we've done nothing in 17 years, right? I think that we first came here in 2014 and we didn't execute our first operation until nearly a decade later. Now, almost another decade has gone by, 17 years, and the situation has gone from catastrophic to apocalyptic. We are out of time, and you two show no fucking urgency.
Yeah. And then at the end, right, this is Shane and Alan again. Shane's sobbing and she says, "It's too late. We are too late." And then the last paragraph is fascinating, right? Shane wept. "Everyone stood by watching in disbelief as their home slipped away, looking at each other, wondering if anyone would do anything about it." Like,
Who is everyone?
who is everyone and when is everyone standing by in disbelief, wondering if anyone would do anything about it? So I think there's like two readings of that. One is that like that's in the past,
Yeah.
and another is that that's in the future, right?
And another, okay, I'm wary of how much I can say for cryptic foreshadowing reasons,
Okay.
but I wonder if this is like a little bit like metatextual within the text, is that this is about like 6 degrees or about the principles themselves, but out of like with time out of joint. But so
Yeah.
part of my reason for saying that is I've been teaching the Republic in one of my classes.
Nice.
And as one is wont to do, like I'm pointing out to them all the times in which the character of Socrates is commenting on the form, structure, time, duration, right, and course that the argument has taken. And like there are all of these restarts, and then like, well, we need to hurry along. Oh, we took this detour, but that detour is like 2.5 books of like the deepest philosophy in the Republic, and on and on and on. And so now I'm like just been hyper aware to the way that like texts are commenting on their own temporality and
Mm-hmm.
their own like form, and like the string that is a particular narrative. And then also this is a John Protevi reading of the Republic, and I forget who he cites that he draws this on, is that like the Republic is always operating on the level of like mythos, logos, ergon, right? So myth, reason, speech, and action. And then at various times in the cave, most of all, those three things come together. So I
Mm.
think there's something about to say about like violence, the meaning of it, how to use and or respond to it, and what it means and what nonviolence means, is like actually something that enfolds together these multiple different layers. It
Love
also
that.
is something that exists in multiple places and times and is like an eternal question,
Yeah,
right? And I don't want to step on what some possibilities for your theory
that's
to
so
further
good.
elaborate that point.
I love that. Um, okay, I want to ask some sort of like dumb uh plot questions, maybe.
I love that.
Okay, so Alan asks Shane if Kai is Lolly's father, and Shane says that's none of your fucking business. Are we supposed to think he is?
I have read it as we're supposed to think he is, but he actually isn't.
Okay, dang. I kind
I
of want
don't.
him to be.
Me too. I mean, he's really good with Lolly.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like a weird like sight of relief in this chapter
Yeah,
almost. He seems less stressed than everyone except the one text box we get of him flashing back to the near death experience in a car.
yeah.
Um but I also feel like we get less of him general than the other four principals here.
I think that's probably true.
But I don't know what that means. If he's like the affable kind of sponge who maybe like holds things together, then maybe that's a meta like reflection on, I don't know, his like adaptability or something.
And it's also so he's their connection to the money,
Yeah. Oh, he
right?
is. Okay, I was wondering that. I had written that
Yeah,
down too. Who has the connection to the benefactor?
yeah.
It's
So
him.
it's Kai.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, right. It's not Alan. Okay. One of my questions sort of leads to a discussion of the gender politics more broadly. Should we go there or should I do another one first?
Let's do another one first and
Okay.
come back to that.
Is there something significant about Shane flagging all of her daughter's malapropisms? And like when you take them
Huh.
together, do they do anything interesting? So there's like she calls a road trip a robe trip.
Uh huh.
She calls Kai Badman Kai, even though
Yeah.
but it's Batman. And
Uh-huh.
then I forget what the third one is.
Shuffle bus as opposed to
Yes.
shuttle bus.
Yes, which is so good. And Shane's like, that's so appropriate because the bus kind of does shuffle.
Hmm.
Um, but like, what it was curious to me that those figure actually quite central, or not centrally, but they're remarkable in the way they kind of disrupt the pattern of the tension.
Hmm.
And I wondered if there was like a really galaxy brain meta take on the role of the malapropism in the 6 degrees bottle episode.
I mean, I could come up with a theory for each of them individually, but nothing
Mm.
that
Connects
stitches them
them.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell me your individual theories and then I'll see if I can do it.
Okay. The robe trip is about all the attention to like domestic labor and socially
Mm,
reproductive labor that is in this chapter, right? So the road trip is always already a road trip because you still have to maintain the socially reproductive labor.
wow. Love that.
The Batman Badman is the, well, 6 degrees are essentially vigilantes,
Mm,
right? Like Bruce Wayne is. And I forget if it was in this chapter or it was in the preceding one where like they talk about how like Batman is ridiculous and terrible.
This one.
And
It's in
it's
my
this
millennial
one.
comedy
Okay,
section.
great. Very good. And so like that's a way of commenting on the like morality question.
Hmm.
And then the shuffle bus is like this question that Quinn puts to the rest of them of, are they just shuffling along, like, you know, building structure without doing any actual, you know, arrive without arriving at the destination, let's say.
Okay, I think the thread that connects those is your point about how the time of kinship and the time of the
Oh,
planet are like folding into one another here.
okay,
Yes.
please.
Okay. You know what? We did it.
I'm into it.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Can I ask you a question
Yes.
before we get to your gender politics question? Are the text boxes like glitching out
Ooh,
in this chapter?
say more.
I'm There's a way in which like the form of the text box at times is overwhelming the actual narrative, right? Like
Yeah.
there's one point where the entire bottom of the
Fold.
page
Yeah.
and then the next page is like entirely text boxes as well. Almost this is like 305, 306,
307 too.
307 as well.
Like there's more text in the boxes than outside of the boxes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the chapter, like the text boxes are getting increasingly and even more deeply personal.
Right. Like they sort of read like not a text box that supplements, but as like an inner monologue of
Yeah.
the characters while the action
Yeah.
is going on.
So I'm
Yeah.
not sure whether to like think about it as escalation, as
Mm-hmm.
glitching, but I feel like the text boxes are functioning somewhat differently here.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and how much crucial information we continue to get. And again, this is like this, they're formally useful in addition to being fucking cool and
Yeah.
mysterious. Um, you know, for instance, like the offhanded remark in one of Quinn's text boxes about how she cannot trace Shane to before
Yeah.
2013, and that scares her because she works for one of the biggest cybersecurity firms in Silicon Valley
Well,
and has
and
presumably all of the tools available to her. And she's like, this bedraggled single mother, right, has outsmarted the best cybersecurity tools I can muster.
yeah, that is part of my one of my gender questions too.
All right, then
Um,
let's yeah.
but I think that's a really good question. Also, other thing I noticed about the boxes is that the the ones that are inner monologues are just sort of named the person
Yeah.
whose monologue it or whose revelation it is.
Hmm.
But the other ones have weird names.
Miscellaneous terrors.
Yeah. And like, okay, so like on 305, right? The midterms is just like the title of one and it talks
Yeah.
about the Republican Party. And then there's the Weatherman Wanted, Dead or Alive, read a sign above Jennifer Braden's world set, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
I don't know. It's just, yeah, I hadn't thought about the texture, if I may, of the text
Oh, you may.
boxes themselves. But I think that's remind me to keep thinking about that. Okay.
Happily.
2 gender questions.
Please.
Why does Shane get so pissed about talking about Kate? A, this is like a plot question. And then the tension between Quinn and Shane is really, really fascinating to me this chapter.
Yes. Hmm.
And I can't figure out exactly how to characterize it because it takes a bunch of different forms, right?
Yeah.
So like Shane or first is like Quinn's obviously pissed that Shane brings Lolly,
Hmm.
right? And then Shane says a couple times, like, I don't want to have negative feelings about the only other woman here, right? So kind of
Correct.
acknowledging the like cat fighty interpretation of their own tension.
Right.
But then Quinn tries to like appeal to Shane by orchestrating a chance run in
Uh-huh.
and like isolating her from the men so that they can be like a unified front, ostensibly like on the grounds that they share something as women, right?
Yes.
And then there's that reveal, right? That actually Quinn is scared of Shane in part because she can't figure out who she is, and in part because of her own like insecurity,
Hmm.
right? Like she wants to be the smartest person in the room, and the fact that she can't
Hmm.
figure out who Shane is means she might not be, and that's terrifying,
Yep.
right? And then there's all the shit about like good mom, bad mom
Uh-huh.
that comes back in like all kinds of different shapes that we've already talked about. So like what is happening?
Okay, I'm gonna gigantically no comment the Kate thing
Okay.
and move on.
Okay. No,
And then
that like alert, no comment.
yeah.
Okay.
And then
Sharing the emoji.
right, the whole red
Yeah,
sign.
yeah.
Breaking. We're no commenting
No
yet another
comment.
question.
Yeah.
And then for the other one, I feel like this is a reflection on the attention that Markley is paying to the internal politics of even a group of 5 people. Because, like, not only are there these dynamics between Quinn and Shane, but there's also, like, several times them commenting on the structure of their decision making, right? Including one that, like, they're not Occupy leftists and they're not prefigurative, which is a funny joke.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
And like asking questions about how you make internal decisions. So like there's a little bit of that. It's pulling on the motherhood chapter. And I think the key thing that you said is this question of, is there any essential coalition between the two of them because they're both women,
Mhm.
right? Or what else would be necessary to sustain solidarity or coalitionship or comradeship or whatever
Yeah.
between the two of them, in addition to the fact that they are both women.
Yeah.
And like Markley does so in a way that is like both obvious, but I think the right way to go of he makes those two the drivers of like let us escalate, including using violence on a more intensified scale.
Right.
While commenting on that in this text box that Murdock has about how everyone who fought abroad in the war on terror, Iraq, Afghanistan, is now just running American politics. And so it doesn't matter whether you get intersectional militarism or like far right wing, balls to the wall militarism, to use perhaps a Murdochism, but they're both there.
Yeah,
And
he's
like
like bemused by
Hogan, yeah,
the conjoining of kind of a feminism and a militarism.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a couple times Shane invokes their racial difference also
yes, exactly,
as like not necessarily an impediment to their being on the same side, but at the very least a variable that renders them somewhat like not quite talking past each other, but somewhat like their stakes are somewhat different. I also do think
yes,
it's interesting to have the women be the ones who propose violence. Like
right.
in what but is that how do I frame this question? Okay, is Markley trying to do something that does not work in doing that?
I think I think I don't think he can necessarily like win the case affirmatively, but
Yeah.
he can win it on the technicality of, if he had written it so that those were the two who wanted to not escalate, we would be like, what the fuck,
What the
bro?
fuck, bro?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And the idea that well, and that they propose it and they lose
Yeah.
is really interesting
Trying to vote
because
along gender lines.
yeah, yeah, and because if they had been the ones ostensibly, if they'd been the ones against violence, they also would have lost. And they're not, but they're very clearly not presenting a sort of united front on the basis of their shared on a basis that can be
Right.
recognizable as like their shared interest. And so that's also fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially because in the chapter, Quinn, right, raises the fact that does Shane ever feel like ostracized or like outnumbered by the men?
Mhm.
And Shane rejects that premise
Yeah.
immediately out of some, and it's of course not just like the racial difference between the two of them, but also the class difference. That
Yeah.
Quinn comes from money, her cover job is working in Silicon Valley, and presumably like she is quite well off,
Valley of the
while
boys.
yeah, serious value of the boys. While Shane is working as a waitress, and as she says at one point, like, I have to be nice and tolerate whatever the fucking assholes are going to do for their $5 tip, or else it's
Yeah.
a crisis.
We also get another nod to like blurry consent
Yes.
when she says she's like sort of conceded to or consented to acquiesce to, right? Like a sexual relationship with her boss primarily because or what she makes this sort of really dark
he
joke. That, like,
would be the person that would, but
yeah,
because he didn't, she's like, all right,
I
fine.
accept. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't particularly care for him, but it's better than being lonely. Right. Which
Yeah,
is, I mean, like thinking back to Sex Wars and honestly McKinnon again, right? Like when is
definitely.
saying yes in a condition like that really, is it proper? Should we properly think of that as without any form of coercion whatsoever? Right.
That's the relevant question.
Yeah. Oh man, so much.
I think the Shane chapters are my favorite chapters.
I think so too. They're really good, but they're really stressful. I feel
They
really
are.
tense when I read them.
They are. So stressful.
I know. Well, also, last time you asked me a question that led me down a personal reflection rabbit hole of like whether Keeper's my favorite character, but I also think Murdock is like high key up there for me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, all five of the principals are, I think, just superb characters in a novel.
Yeah, really good. Should we move to our scathing critiques of others' takes on the current crisis?
Yes. May I go first as a way to
Yes.
pick up on some of your questions at the end there?
Yes, please.
So I'm going to propose as the relevant theory to include in this manifesto, Lise Vogel as like an
Oh,
emblem of Marxist feminism, who
okay.
is deeply attentive to like the precise within Marxist feminism debates about like what counts or what is classified as socially reproductive labor,
Yeah.
what counts as like labor that is wageable, right?
Mhm.
And like, because she's not a wages for housework Marxist feminist, but she's, I think, understands and appreciates wages for housework as a Marxist feminist project. And I think broadly the way that she wants to think about socially reproductive labor, because of all the stuff about motherhood in this chapter, for a reason
Yeah.
we've already identified, because, and maybe more than anything else, the recurring bit about Alan's wife.
Yes. That's
And
in
then,
my LOL, but like
yeah.
yikes
And
section too.
then, right. And that keeps coming back. And then there's also questions, and like it's actually different within this particular set of five people of who is going to do the socially reproductive labor among all of them. Like who is going to clean the house after they leave with bleach, right? Kai is going to do it. Then they have a cleaning crew coming in. So there's like something about that as well. But then there's like an even finer grained version of this, which is around things like who is going to cook for the five of them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like in addition to Lise Vogel, I want to propose, and this is a all credit goes to friend of the show Amy Schiller. So Amy and I have this piece out about like this is an earlier era. Now it would be about ChatGPT or whatever. It was about Alexa
Hmm.
and kind of like domestic, early stage domestic AI. And in the process of doing this article, one of like the founding moments of Amy and I understanding what this article was is she was reading a travel diary of Ellen Cantorau, who was like a journalist and
Hmm.
activist in like among American feminists in the 70s. She goes to Italy in 1972 and she meets and like spends time with people in like the workerist, the
Hmm.
Operaismo movement and the Italian women's liberation movement.
Hmm.
And there's this like incredible, and we quote this in the piece, but there's this incredible part of her diary that I'm going to read.
Okay.
All right. So this is excerpts from a diary, Women's Liberation, Workers' Autonomy in Turin and Milan, in Liberation, 1972, page 11. And so this is Ellen Cantorau. F and A arrive. They sit uneasily in MT's kitchen. A young man doing his military service is there, an ex-student. He is talking to me in English about aesthetics. The conversation is luckily cut short by the announcement that there is no bread in the house. Who will go and buy it?
Wow.
Right. And so there's this way in which Candrau is just like cuttingly and brilliantly going right to the heart of the matter is like who would have had to have noticed that there was going to be no bread and who would have needed to buy the bread, who is going to buy the bread now that there is none, and who is expected, even in these radical spaces, to have done the labor of doing that. Right. And obviously, here I'm thinking about as well, like Ella Baker talking about what it was like to be in SCLC before she
Mm.
like joined up with SNCC and to be a woman in that organization. or any of kind of the number of like women of color feminists talking about what life was like being asked to like make coffee, have sex with the men, and take notes in radical spaces. And so there's this way in which like this chapter, by folding together, both the like political of like what is the socially reproductive labor of this movement with what is the socially reproductive labor that Shane is doing for Lolly,
Yeah.
like I think just collapses all of these questions into one another. So that's like
Mm-hmm.
Marxist feminism broadly, Lise Vogel somewhat specifically, and most specifically Ellen Cantor.
That's so good.
That's what I got.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting too that to think about that as like no one's immune to presuming, right? Like who will do the labor? Not even Quinn, right? or maybe especially not Quinn. But I was thinking about that example of the bread. It's not just like who is presumed to have done that, but also who is unconsciously like being on the receiving end of the blame when it wasn't done, right?
Yep.
Like which is I think just a different version of that same presumption, but like there's a little more animosity or bitterness there, right?
Awesome.
Bitterness I think was a little bit of a theme in this chapter too, which is kind of
for
funny.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, I went Fanon for this.
Okay, great. That was also on the possible list.
I thought that maybe you did, but I had I it just like there were two passages that really were like screaming Fanon to me. So I went to Wretched of the Earth and I wanted to just pull a couple things from it to like set up a way of thinking about the relationship between the five principles in kind of like Fanon's terms, but also thinking about like the US as a colonial base and like how we might imagine the politics of colonialism more broadly figuring in the politics of climate change kind of in the novel. So
incredible.
Okay, so I want to start with just the very beginning, page 1, Wretched of the Earth, kind of like laying out the central claim. Okay, so he says national liberation, national reawakening, restoration of the nation to the people or commonwealth, whatever the name used, whatever the latest expression, decolonization is always a violent event. Okay, so violence, right, is a part of the political project. And then the book is to explain like how and why and what that means for the politics of decolonization. Okay, so then we go to page 6.
Oh, I think I know what quote we're going to.
Okay. Challenging the colonial world is not a rational confrontation of viewpoints.
One of the best passages in all of Wretched.
It is not a discourse on the universal, but the impassioned claim by the colonized that their world is fundamentally different. The colonial world is a Manichaean world, right? So a world organized light versus dark, right? Good versus evil. This passage in general is just like really great, but I want to think about the idea of a rational response to or rational politics of climate change. Okay, and then we're going to go to a couple ways of characterizing like the different views. So page 13 is part of the discussion of the colonized intellectual. And he's talking about, right, in order to assimilate the culture of the oppressor and venture into his fold, the colonized subject has had to pawn some of his own intellectual possessions. He has had to assimilate the way the colonist bourgeoisie thinks. And then later down, right, at the start of his cohabitation with the people, the colonized intellectual gives priority to detail and tends to forget the very purpose of the struggle, the defeat of colonialism. Swept along by the many facets, he tends to concentrate on local tasks undertaken zealously, but almost always too pedantically. He does not always see the overall picture. And then on 17, we get this description of sort of like the common kind of colonized subject. And he has this like amazing the full significance of the all too familiar head in the sand behavior at a collective level, right? So people, colonized subject draws his knife at the slightest hostile or aggressive look, but you know, the colonist or the police officer can beat him day in and day out and he won't, right, like do anything about it. So like this sort of like denial of the reality of the situation.
Yep.
Right. And then we have on 21. Okay, this is a good one. I'm just reading the whole essay. Okay. Um, we have seen that this violence throughout the colonial period, although constantly on edge, runs on empty. We've seen it channeled through the emotional release of dance or possession. We've seen it exhaust itself in fratricidal struggles. The challenge now is to seize the violence as it realigns itself. So I think this
Ooh.
is like a question about who, sort of like almost in the Foucauldian sense, right? Like violence is not just like something one possesses and does to another, but it is,
A
right,
field, a
a field, a
grid.
grid,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Um so like a fresh set of circumstances will now enable it to change direction. So like who's gonna do something to sort of spur that change, right? Is the political question. And then one more about the national bourgeoisie. Uh so
Yeah.
this is on 25. So let's see. Another thing is that they, the national bourgeoisie, are convinced that violent methods are ineffective. For them, there can be no doubt any attempt to smash colonial oppression by force is an act of despair, a suicidal act, because the colonizers' tanks and fighter planes are constantly on their minds. When they are told we must act, they imagine bombs being dropped, armored cars rumbling through the streets, a hail of bullets, the police, and they stay put. They're losers from the start. And then there's also like another kind of critique of diplomacy, which is really good. And I think like a really, in this context, like a nod to um, their conversation about the act, right? Which
Hmm.
Murdock has like a great phrase for what he calls it, like a paper tiger or something. Like
Oh,
I forget the exact phrase, but it's really good. And then there's just like this concluding bit, right? Where like of like violence is not like violence itself is a praxis, right? So this on 44. Violence can
yes.
be understood to be the perfect mediation. The colonized man liberates himself in and through violence. This praxis enlightens the militant because it shows him the means and the end. So this idea that violence is like, because violence is the sort of content and the like spirit and the soul of the colonial project, that like, what's the word I want to say, like having wielding that violence is the point. Right. um
Yes.
and I think that those are just like so every facet of his discussion of violence maps onto in some way the kind of roundabout they do in this chapter with the questions of violence. Like, you know, I don't know, Alan is maybe like the national bourgeoisie, right?
Yep.
Um, like Kai is like the colonial intellectual, right?
Okay. Uh-huh.
Um, like Quinn is, I guess, like a revolutionary, right?
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, but also like I don't know. I think she maybe is I feel like she's the hardest to kind of read in Fanon's frame, because on the one hand she's
Yeah.
like violence is necessary, but I don't know that she's thinking about violence in the way that Fanon is thinking about it, as like itself the kind of definition of the thing we're trying to overthrow, right?
Yeah, maybe there's a useful distinction here. So when I teach this part of Fanon, I
Mhm,
always like talk with students about, okay, yes, there is this like phenomenological affirmation of the self,
mhm,
right? Of the colonized self, right, becoming a self, right, through violence, but that ultimately Fanon is only thinking about violence as a necessary,
mhm,
right, sort of like an ahistorically necessary and existentially necessary,
mhm.
right, practice, not as something that we are condemning as morally good or morally bad, but
Right.
talking about in terms of like a politics of reality,
Yeah.
right? Similar conversation that like one has if we teach about Malcolm X or something,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And I think that there's something useful there about Quinn, that maybe Quinn is the one who would think that Fanon is like violence is fucking great and
Yeah.
fun and morally good.
Yes.
And Shane is the one who understands that violence is historically necessary,
Yes.
existentially necessary in the Fanonian sense.
Yeah, and then I'm wondering, like, how to use Fanon to describe in the world of the Deluge, but also in our own world, the like nature of the American colonial project, right? Because, like, to a certain degree, Shane is a colonial subject, right? There's one
Yes,
scene in particular, and this is where Fanon really jumped out at me, where I think this is on 305, where she talks about being a person of color. Oh yeah, 305. So oh, this was another like aside question I had. Digital resurrection, is this the first mention we have of
I
that?
believe so.
Okay.
Yes.
Digital resurrection was a nifty trick on the TV CGI Dan Rather sent it off to a correspondent reporting the
Dan
CPAC, blah,
Rather.
blah, blah. At every sight of her, right, that woman, Braden, at every sight of her, Shane felt a darkness creep into her periphery, something she was sure every person of color felt from time to time, this unsettling understanding that you are part of a place where you don't belong and have never belonged, where at any moment the violence that made this world possible might erupt anew. So, like, Fanon's theorizing, right, like the African continent as a site of colonial violence where there is a before, right? But it's not like a romantic before that we're trying to go back to, right? It's a before that has been sort of violently disrupted. But like what and that is true um of the US insofar as we're thinking about the colonization of indigenous people. But there's also like layers of the colonization of like people who like what's the I forget the framing of it from transnational feminism, but there's like a kind of multiple there's another mode of colonialism which is that like people who were brought here, right, for whatever reason, like either explicitly through a transatlantic slave trade or through like processes of displacement from other kinds of global phenomena, right? That
Mm-hmm.
there's a kind of internal colonialism happening that stratifies people on the basis of race or class or whatever, right?
Yes.
But then I think there's also like the ecological reading, right? Of that, like the earth itself, the geography of the United States as a colonial subject, right? Um, and that, like, I don't know if we want to talk about like the agency of non-human nature yet, but like that maybe as like a coalitional, like true leftist decolonial project, like human agents have some sort of moral obligation to like non-human nature to like seize the I don't know, to like seize and deploy violence to free them from the colonial project or something. I don't know. I don't know quite what that reading is there, but you know what I'm getting at? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it loops back like to that original conversation we were having about how to think the several different um, scales and
yeah,
registers of violence
yeah.
together. Like, how do we put them back together?
And there was one other uh quote from the chapter that made me think about Fanon 15. Oh, this is one you already read, right? Shane, right, saying, what makes us think these elites are any different? We're talking about people who are happily
Yeah.
incinerating the conditions of life for nothing more than a few quarters of profit. We can hem and haw about violence, but they're the most violent people history's ever seen. So, like, I think one read of that kind of on Fanon's or through Fanon's frame is that, like, um, those people individually are violent and thus kind of like protected from the moral fabric that prevents
Right.
us from thinking of them as
Right.
like acceptable losses or something. But the other is that like they're they're sort of like agents that are like deeply tied into the ministering of violence, right? That is the essence of the kind of colonial state. Um, and I think in that sense, the violence isn't actually against them, right?
Yeah.
And it's not, and it's more necessary, in fact, because of the like their place in the colonial structure or something like that.
A Manichaean world.
Yeah,
Indeed.
yeah. Sorry, that was a lot of fun.
There's always time for Fanon.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I was like thinking with too, which I already mentioned, was um Rob Nixon's slow violence, which I think would be and maybe this is like a future and I don't know if anyone's actually done this, but maybe there's like a reading of Fanon and Nixon together that actually tries to do the work of talking about the earth as a colonized
Colonial
subject.
system. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, put it to the book we write about this book.
I
There's
know.
there's chapter 2 right there.
That made me tired.
All right, I'll take up cultural artifact while you recover.
Okay.
I had several possibilities for here, but I'm going to go with the TV show Say Nothing from late
Ooh.
2024. Did you watch this?
No, but Matt loved the book.
Okay. And I have not actually read the book, but I have watched the show. As a show, the first half is much better than the second half, I will say. The thing about Say Nothing that I think most spoke to me about this particular chapter, and something that both the show and Markley I do well, is that there's a frankness to the depiction of the appeal and romance of revolutionary violence, and a non like muling recognition of the terror and inhumanity of revolutionary violence. That those things are all able to exist together, right? The beauty and the romance and the appeal and the terror and the inhumanity, that like all those things must be understood together without like lionizing or like doing hagiography of revolutionary violence or those who commit it. And like I think that is central to the parts of that show that work really, really well, and particularly like the characters of Dolores and Marion, more than anyone else, although others as well, especially as they contrast with the colonial intellectual and then colonized intellectual of, where we put Jerry Adams is a different story for a different time. But there's holding on to those two things together. Both of them, both the book and the show, are interested in how that particular dynamic functions through gender in a revolutionary context, because the two main characters are women, and there's part of the plot of the early couple of episodes is what it would mean for women to take a different role in the IRA, much like Quinn is trying to recruit Shane for like an internal gender debate within the principles of 6 Degrees. I think that that's part of it too. And then I just think that there's frankness as word I already used, but like there's no bullshit, right? I can understand each character's position in this novel on violence and understand a thought process that is reality based behind all of them. There's no like, I think, knee jerk, unthinking or unthought positions. And that's mostly true as well for Say Nothing as a show. And I think it's a place that where those two things overlap. And then if I wasn't going to do Say Nothing, my cultural artifact was going to be Bulls on Parade.
Oh, very nice. That's funny.
But you could soundtrack, if you want to do like a disjointed soundtrack, you could put Bulls on Parade on for a Say Nothing episode or a Stephen Markley Deluge chapter.
That's really funny because I had two options as well, and one of them was actually Subterranean Homesick Blues, which has nothing to do with Rage Against the Machine, but everything to do with the Weathermen, apparently, which I didn't know until I looked it up. So apparently they ripped their name from that song. So the lyric in verse 2, the lyric in verse 2 is Maggie comes fleetfoot, face full of black soot, talking that the heat puts plants in the bed, but phone's tapped anyway. Maggie says the minis say they must bust in early May, orders from the DA. Walk on your tiptoes, don't tie no bows, better stay away from those that carry a fire hose, keep a clean nose, watch the plain clothes. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. That's like amazing. The entire second verse of the song. And apparently that's where the weather, what's the full name? The Weather Underground?
Weather Underground.
Yeah, got their, that's where they got the name from. According to the internet. I don't know how true that is, but it strikes me as plausible.
Okay, so Wikipedia says that Dylan is the most frequently cited musician by judges and lawyers in like written legal work.
Oh.
And that the most cited line is you don't need a weatherman line.
Wow. That's kind of wild.
That checks out.
Yeah.
Judges do be listening to Bob Dylan.
Judges be listening to Bob Dylan. Okay, so the other one I wanted to propose as a companion to this is like sort of not the artifact itself, but the kind of conversation around the artifact insofar as there is one.
I love that.
Okay, so there's another reference to Tinkerbell in this, right? And Quinn's sort of like pissed that Shane has this like, insider, like infrastructural institutional insider, right? That nobody has access to except for her. And then I was thinking about like Tinkerbell's function in Peter Pan.
Okay.
And like the gender politics of this chapter.
Oh.
And like critiques of gender and race in Peter Pan more broadly.
Yeah.
So there's like 3 primary characters among the children in like both in the world and in Neverland, right? There's Wendy Darling, who very famously like becomes like mother to all the lost boys, right? And then there's Tiger Lily, a
Classic.
very like, racialized, orientalized, exoticized, right? Like character who um causes some drama, right? For right causes, quote unquote, scare quotes around. And then there's Tinkerbell, right? Who has this like animosity toward all the girls, right? And that circulate around Peter. Um, and there's so many. Did a quick Google search, like a bunch of undergrad theses on like gender and Peter Pan, which is really funny.
That makes sense.
And like, when they redo versions of it both in the play form and in like films, like a lot of people have tried to update some of the like problematic dynamics of it, but it's really fascinating to think that like there's like a little bit of a script that um I think your way of framing it in terms of like Marxist feminism and social reproduction, the like tension between Quinn and Shane is like really spot on. But there is like a way more rudimentary read on it, which is that like they're playing out this script of kind of like, female resentment or whatever, which is like kind of what Peter Pan does. And then like, what's the limits of that, right? So somebody, right, like it doesn't actually get at how any of them are positioned vis-a-vis Peter, right, actually
Mm-hmm.
in the in whatever like hierarchies of power exist in Neverland, right? Or like the real like class resentments they might actually have for one another to like go Beauvoir, right? Like why have women not
Right.
stood up and resisted the terms of their condition because they don't see themselves as part of a class, right?
Right.
And then I just think it's funny that like uh Tinkerbell is like magical, but she is portrayed as this like jealous, like petty bitch, and like that is also the code name that Shane uses is really funny. I don't know if there are other like other associations with Tinkerbell aside from Peter Pan, but
Not that I'm aware of.
right, like that's a character that lives in that world, right?
Yeah.
But I was just thinking that there's a funny discourse around those characters that like really not perfectly, but sort of tangentially or orthogonally taps into the gender resentment in
Yeah.
6 degrees.
It raises the possibility of reading Quinn and Shane as like two revolutionary girl bosses
Yeah.
competing against one another for who can girl boss too close to the sun.
I know, which I don't think Mark Lee wants to
Me
do,
neither.
but I
Me
wonder
neither.
if there's like a wink at that with Tinkerbell.
I'm here for that reading. Obviously.
I also
want to point out it's funny that much like Markley is like we're going to have Shane and Quinn want to do violence and the boys do not violence, that you went with Fanon and I went with Lise Vogel.
I know, that is really funny.
So good job us.
Good job us. We did it.
Yeah.
Wait, but I just want to tell you one other funny thing about Peter Pan. I was looking
I want to
for
know this, yeah.
like little like, discourse around it and engagement with the kind of politics of it. And there's a lot of I can't tell like from what kind of ideological motivation this emerges, but like critiques of Peter as a character that's actually like preying on young boys. And this is like an early set of critiques that make me feel like a little bit of like gay, like early 20th century gay panic.
Like gay panic.
Yeah. And I was like, what a weird way to critique that artifact when there's like so much other stuff.
So many better ways to do so.
Isn't that really interesting?
That is very interesting.
Okay, that's enough with Peter Pan.
Oh my God.
I just wanted to flag too the things that were mentioned in the chapter. So there's a reference to the Wizard of Oz, which is kind of funny, or Oz rather, and the Hydra in the same box.
Okay.
And I was a little bit like, those seem like mismatched references to me for the point that was trying to be made. So it's a point about like, I forgot to write down what page this is on, but it's in one of the text boxes where they're talking about like their strategy. It's on 299. Okay. When Kai first began seriously discussing this with Shane, he had known it would be vital that they appear as a hydra of cunning, the great and terrible Oz. But like Oz is not great
singular.
and terrible.
Yeah.
Also.
And is, yeah.
And right, like he's like just a little man hiding behind a machine. And then the Hydra is like many-headed,
Mm-hmm.
So like what is that mixed reference?
It's are the principles of 5 degrees, of 6 degrees 5, or are they 1?
You think that's what it is?
Maybe.
Yeah. Or
It's
it's a mistake.
or it's but like a mistake that in all of us, mix our metaphors at various
Yeah.
places.
I like thinking that it's like a mixed metaphor in the world of the book, but that there's an intention to it from Markley.
I'm open to that reading.
Oh my god. And then Batman, obviously, with the amazing critique of Batman.
Yep.
Which is
Which
on
angered one of my students very much.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my god. Do you have it
I don't.
ready? So good. Oh yeah, here. This is on 309. In the discussion of the shuffle bus. It did sort of shuffle, and Batman was a bad man, the spoiled son of a billionaire waging his own one-man paramilitary war.
It's a great line.
So good.
Should we talk about some of the other sarcastic digs?
Yes.
I think the Batman bad man is a useful transition.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved the line about Tinkerbell and Murdock's the one who's like, I think she's just your standard fair fairy, which is like
so
great
good.
wordplay. And despite the like extensive TBI situation for Murdock, he's still capable of the quick retorts. I enjoyed. The text box at the very beginning with Zayden, I'm not sure how we're pronouncing the pop star, who wore I'm with the Weatherman t-shirt and then said, what they're doing is not violence. What the people who own those coal plants were doing, that's violence. And then the text box goes on to say, a pop star who'd gotten her start with a #1 single about her boyfriend's hair certainly had a better grasp on the situation than most journalists.
So
and I was trying to think like, who would be the like Zayden of our world?
Oh.
Right? Like what pop star turning into be like I love revolutionary violence would be most Zayden like? And I came up with Sabrina Carpenter.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right, because her songs appear right on surface to be about like her boyfriend's hair, right?
Yeah.
But she seems
the equivalent.
but like there's like a savviness there maybe, right?
Oh, there absolutely is, I think.
I really liked on 292. This is just like a dumb aside, but they're in the house and Shane, right, they're walking in and Shane's narrating the scene and she says, inside, warm light bathed the wood of the walls, floors, and ceiling. Across from the cushy furniture in the living room was the kitchen where Alan, Murdock, Kai, and Quinn colluded over pasta. It's just like such a fun little way to frame that moment. Colluded over pasta. I'm going to say that every time I eat pasta now.
I love that.
What else? There's so many good ones.
Picture Ripley watching you eat pasta. I mean, like Emily and Ripley were colluding over pasta.
Oh yeah, I laughed on 297 when they bankrupt in Vij.
Yeah.
2 years ago, they'd met at the same cabin, popping champagne, mission accomplished, and all that. Capital M, capital A. Very good.
Which is the second time that George W. Bush's mission accomplished moment has come up. I'm back in the first Shane chapter, I believe.
Yeah. I also like when Shane describes Quinn's quote absurd communiques calling people to war, or in her opinion, cringe-inducing. It made them sound like every dorm room revolutionary.
Yeah,
with dopey leftist juvenile rhetoric that made Anonymous sound mature. It's like such a sick burn.
Yep. I have to say, I did laugh and kind of actually though enjoyed Quinn's communique taglines. Like,
yeah, they're great.
Don't tell me about your carbon footprint unless you've blown up a pipeline. Notes.
We didn't do it, but we dug it. Is so good. I also liked when Shane describes the bed of red pine needles in the forest as looking like a shag carpet.
Oh yeah, that is good.
All of Murdock's text box, when he talks about that bipartisan military overreach, is insane. It tickled him the way she can join feminism and militarism so seamlessly. Now the Dumbocrats ran vets at every level, and you could almost see in real time the war is coming home. Blah blah blah. I just like that whole. I mean, it's so dark, but it's like sharp.
Yep. I don't have anything else to add for that one.
We get the pastor.
Yep. He's predicting wildfires in California.
Oh, we have to do one. Alan leaving academia. LOL.
Oh yes, please.
Yes, this is on 310. Alan laughed loudly at this. It was a kind and beautiful sound. She'd first met him in the Gulf during the BP crisis as he was trying to
The best
transition
line.
from, quote, the piss pot of academia to doing something right for the world, end quote.
That would have been a candidate as well for my funny thing in the intro.
Oh, yeah. So good.
I was trapped in the piss pot of academia or something like that. Aren't we all?
No, I think that's on my LOLs.
All right. Time for some solidarity, allies, and enemies. Can we talk a tiny bit more about Quinn?
Yeah.
And this may like just be for like personal reasons, but I like Quinn way more than Shane and the text boxes want us as readers to like.
Yeah,
Quinn.
I do too.
There's like a little bit of like class trader vibes or attempts to do class trader, race trader, even if she wouldn't frame it in those terms. And, you know, I mean, this is a Fanon question. It's also a Gramsci question, but I just kind of think Quinn is a fascinating character as the like it's because it's her class position enables her to have the most like dorm room revolutionary ideals. But also, like, as Alan even speaks to at one point, it's necessary that they be able to have those conversations. So there's something about like her class position and like her history that positions her both like outside a little bit of 6 Degrees as like a little bit of like a holier than thou leftist, but then also makes her someone whose like economic security and class status enables her to push in different directions.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think she's kind of funny.
She's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're right that we are supposed to not like her that much, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. The like Alan Shane paternal vibes are, I think, worth noting here in the solidarity, allies, and enemies. And the extent to which maybe it's a little bit mutual, like maybe in which Shane also sees Alan as a bit of a father figure or older brother or uncle or something like that.
I think they both say that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, as you point out, we get Keeper's name, John G. Gerald. And this line about like patsies are there to take the fall from Murdock.
Yeah. Patsies that's like literally the purpose of patsies. Ooh. Yeah, I don't think there's anyone else new, right?
No.
Shall we conclude with our calls to action?
We shall. What do you got?
Mine's not very good. I was trying to. Okay. I was looking up, like, refreshing my mind on like SDS slogans and thinking about how different the SDS slogans are from like the entire ethos of the Weather Underground, right? So remember SDS is like make love not war, ballots not bombs, like all those kinds of slogans, and then like the Weather Underground is literally like doing nothing is violence, so we must violence, you know. So like I was trying to think in that vein, but my brain sort of short circuited out at like too late for slogans. Which is not really. It's like an implicit call to action.
It's also meta, and it also is getting into the time thing. So I like it. I went simplistic and not great. I just went simply escalate.
Oh, I like that. We could combine them.
We could. It's too late for slogans. Escalate.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's pretty good.
I think that's wonderful.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. Up next, we have the third Matt chapter, Years of Rain and Thunder Part 3, set in 2031.
Yes. In the meantime, thank you for joining us on We Are the Deluge.
And we are the Deluge.